Imagine being on an international flight and suddenly realizing that the woman sitting a few rows ahead speaks fluently 7 different languages. But what no one on that plane imagined was that next to her was a silent billionaire who would not only change her life forever, but also her own heart. Do you want to know how a simple gesture at 10,000 meters turned into a story that goes beyond success and ends in love? Then watch until the end, because what happens after that flight will surprise you. Don't forget to leave a like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next exciting stories that will touch your heart. Clara sat quietly in the crowded airport lounge, her small suitcase tucked between her feet as Miguel played with a worn-out toy car on the seat beside her. The noise of travelers rushing through the terminal felt like waves crashing in her tired mind, but she kept her focus on her son's bright eyes. She had just left an interview in Dubai that ended with a polite rejection and a heavy heart. The thought of returning to London without good news made her chest tighten with worry. Still, she held herself together, determined to hide the weight she carried from the little boy who depended on her. When boarding began, Clara helped Miguel into his small jacket and guided him toward the line with a gentle hand. She whispered to him about the adventure of flying through the clouds, hoping her words would bring excitement instead of fear. Other passengers shuffled forward with murmurs of different languages blending in the air, and Clara instinctively caught bits and pieces of what they said. She was exhausted, but her mind still lit up at the sounds of foreign words, like music that never left her. Miguel squeezed her hand, and she smiled down at him with a warmth she forced herself to feel. Inside the plane, the cabin lights glowed softly, and the hum of engines filled the background as they found their seats. Clara helped Miguel climb up and settled him by the window so he could watch the runway. He pressed his face to the glass, pointing out the shapes of other airplanes moving like giants in the distance. Clara tucked their small bag under the seat, glancing around at the mix of travelers, each with their own stories. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to be someone without worries, just passing time in the sky. The safety instructions played overhead, and Clara listened even though she had flown many times before. Miguel asked questions about the seatbelt, and she answered patiently, showing him how to click it into place. Her own mind, however, was far away, counting the hours until they landed and wondering how she would pay rent next month. She noticed a man in first class glance back toward her row, but she quickly looked away, not interested in strangers noticing her struggles. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers twisting together as the plane began to move. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Clara felt her heart race with a mix of excitement and unease. Miguel laughed when the plane lifted, pressing his face harder against the window to see the city lights shrinking below. Clara closed her eyes briefly, breathing slowly, reminding herself she had to stay strong no matter what. The seatbelt pressed against her stomach as the plane climbed higher through the night sky. She had no idea that this flight would bring a turning point she never could have imagined. The plane had been in the air for almost an hour when the first confusion started near the middle rows. A flight attendant struggled to explain something to an older man who looked nervous and kept shaking his head. Clara noticed the tension growing as the man's hands moved quickly, trying to express himself. Miguel was drawing on a napkin, so she gently patted his shoulder and stood up. She walked over, speaking softly in Arabic, and the man's worried eyes instantly softened with relief. Passengers nearby turned their heads as Clara calmly translated the attendant's instructions, making sure every detail was clear. The man smiled gratefully, his shoulders relaxing as he finally understood about his meal request and the seatbelt reminder. Clara nodded and returned to her seat, but before she could sit down, another voice called out for help. A young woman in uniform struggled to explain something to a French couple, their brows furrowed in frustration. Clara stepped forward again, switching languages like it was second nature. Her French words flowed easily, and the couple's faces lit up with understanding as they thanked her warmly. Clara gave them a reassuring grin, feeling a spark of pride even though her own life felt like it was falling apart. She noticed Miguel watching her with wide eyes, his little hands resting on the armrest. For him, seeing his mom help strangers was like watching a hero in action. Clara gave him a wink before turning back to the aisle. Not long after, another commotion started a few rows back, this time with a man speaking rapid Italian, upset about a delayed service. Clara moved again, her steps steady despite the shaking plane, and began speaking to him with ease. The man's expression softened as he listened, finally nodding in agreement after a few sentences. The flight attendant nearby looked amazed, whispering a thank you as Clara patted the man's arm. The energy in the cabin began to feel lighter, calmer. Clara didn't stop there, stepping in once more when a family from Spain needed directions to the bathroom. Her Spanish was warm and friendly, and soon even other passengers started smiling at her, impressed by her gift. Miguel clapped softly, giggling as if his mom had just performed magic. Clara returned to her seat at last, a little breathless but glowing with quiet satisfaction. The engines hummed steadily, carrying them through the dark sky. She didn't notice that someone in first class had been watching her every move with growing interest. Ethan Moreau leaned back in his wide first-class seat, the soft leather creaking slightly as he adjusted his posture. He had been reading a report on his tablet, but the distant sound of different languages caught his attention. Through the curtain separating classes, he noticed a woman standing in the aisle, her voice calm and patient. The way she moved, steady and kind, made him pause without knowing why. He lowered his tablet, letting his eyes follow her every gesture. Her tone carried warmth even though the cabin buzzed with tension from anxious travelers. Ethan studied the curve of her smile as she reassured the older man, his worry fading with every word she spoke. He was used to people rushing through life, but she took her time with strangers, as if each one mattered. That simple act felt strangely powerful to him, a reminder of something genuine. He found himself leaning forward slightly, curious to see what she would do next. When she switched from French to Italian without hesitation, Ethan's brows lifted in quiet surprise. He had met countless executives and translators in his life, yet none of them carried that natural ease she showed. It wasn't just skill, it was the tenderness in her tone, the gentle way she bent down to meet someone's eyes. He saw the little boy in the window seat beaming with pride, his small hands clapping softly. Ethan felt something stir in him, a memory of a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. The flight attendants whispered among themselves, clearly impressed by her presence, but Ethan barely heard them. His attention stayed locked on her, watching how she moved back to her seat with grace and humility. He noticed how tired her eyes looked despite the smile she offered her son. That contrast, strength wrapped around exhaustion, struck something deep in him. For a moment, the world outside the plane seemed far away, replaced by the simple scene unfolding before him. As the hours passed, Ethan kept glancing toward her row, unable to stop himself. He was known for his sharp mind and cold decisions, but something about this woman broke through his guarded walls. He wondered who she was, what life had shaped her into someone so rare. The sound of Miguel's laughter drifted through the cabin, light and full of hope. Ethan rested his hand on his chin, unaware that this flight was quietly changing something inside him. Ethan waited for the right moment, his heart beating a little faster as he watched Clara finish helping yet another passenger. When she returned to her seat, he stood up from first class and walked toward her row with a calm but steady step. His voice was warm and polite as he asked if she could spare a few minutes to talk. Clara looked surprised, glancing at Miguel before nodding with a small smile. He gestured toward an empty seat near him, and she followed quietly, smoothing her sweater as she sat down. Up close, Ethan noticed details he had missed from a distance, like the faint freckles on her cheeks and the tired shimmer in her eyes. He introduced himself simply, leaving out the part about being one of the wealthiest men in Europe. Clara tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and replied softly, her accent gentle but clear. He asked how she had learned so many languages, genuinely intrigued by her natural talent. Clara hesitated, then began to speak, her hands folding nervously in her lap. She explained that she had been a language teacher for several years, moving from one small job to another wherever opportunities came. Her dream had always been to work at an international school, but life had turned unpredictable after Miguel was born. Clara spoke of nights spent studying and teaching herself new words while her baby slept beside her. She admitted that traveling for interviews was difficult without steady income. Ethan listened intently, not interrupting, his eyes steady on her face. The cabin around them seemed to fade as Clara went on, her voice low but filled with quiet strength. She confessed she had lost her last position when the school closed, and since then she had been searching for a chance to start again. Miguel's name came up often, her love for him woven into every detail she shared. Ethan noticed how her shoulders lifted slightly each time she mentioned her son's smile. He found himself leaning closer, drawn in by her honesty. Clara finished by saying she didn't mind the hard work as long as Miguel had what he needed. Her words carried a mix of sadness and hope, and Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. For a moment, neither of them spoke, letting the hum of the engines fill the silence. Clara looked down at her hands, unsure if she had shared too much with a stranger. Ethan wanted to say something meaningful, but the words caught in his throat. He simply watched her, sensing there was much more to her story than she had revealed. Ethan sat quietly for a moment, his eyes thoughtful as the plane glided through layers of clouds. He rested his hands on his knees, choosing his next words carefully before speaking again. Clara shifted in her seat, sensing his gaze but unsure why he hadn't said anything yet. Then, with a calm voice, he asked if she would be open to hearing about a project he was working on. The tone in his voice carried a kind of weight she didn't expect. He explained that he was in the process of opening an international education institute, something he had dreamed of for years. His vision was to bring together teachers from around the world to create programs that inspired children. As he spoke, Clara's eyes widened slightly, her mind trying to follow the scope of what he was saying. Ethan leaned forward a little, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He told her he was looking for someone special to lead the language department. Clara blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly, her fingers curling around the edge of her seat. She gave a small laugh, soft and nervous, asking if he was serious or simply being kind. Ethan smiled faintly, explaining that he never offered positions lightly and that he had watched her handle the passengers with grace and skill. He praised the way she communicated with warmth, not just with knowledge, and said that was rare. The words felt unreal, and Clara could only stare at him for a moment. Her heart started racing as she thought about what this could mean for Miguel, for their future, for everything she had been fighting for. At the same time, a voice in her head whispered doubts, reminding her that life usually didn't hand out miracles. She asked why he would trust someone like her with such a big role when he barely knew her. Ethan's expression softened, his eyes steady and calm, as he told her sometimes you just know when you've met the right person. Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. Miguel's laughter drifted from the row behind them, breaking the heavy pause between her and Ethan. Clara glanced toward her son, then back to the man who seemed too good to be real. She felt a swirl of emotions, hope, fear, excitement, all crashing together in her chest. Her instincts told her to be careful, to guard her heart and protect her child. Yet something about Ethan's voice made her want to believe every single word. Clara took a slow breath, still unsure how to respond. The jet touched down in London under a pale morning sky, and Ethan stayed close as Clara guided Miguel through the busy terminal. A private car waited outside, the driver greeting them with a respectful nod as he loaded their bags. Clara kept glancing at Ethan, unsure how to thank him for all of this kindness. Miguel pressed his face to the window, amazed by the city's tall buildings rushing by. Ethan sat quietly beside them, his mind already planning the next steps. When they arrived at a beautiful hotel near the heart of the city, Clara could hardly believe her eyes. The lobby smelled faintly of flowers, and soft music played as they checked in. Ethan made sure they had a spacious suite with 2 beds and a view of the river. He told her not to worry about anything, that this was his way of giving her a fair start. Clara's heart beat fast as she led Miguel to the elevator, still feeling like she was living someone else's life. Later that evening, Clara sat by the window, looking out at the glowing lights that stretched across the city. She thought about how only days ago she had been on a flight home with nothing but questions about her future. Now she was in London, preparing for a chance she never thought she would have. Miguel played on the carpet with a small toy car, his laughter filling the room. Clara smiled softly, though doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. Ethan stopped by after handling a few calls, bringing them a basket of fruit and warm pastries from the hotel kitchen. He stayed for a while, listening to Miguel chatter about the planes and the busy streets outside. Clara noticed how Ethan's eyes softened when he spoke to her son, how his posture relaxed as he leaned against the table. They talked about the upcoming interview, going over details and schedules. His voice was calm, carrying a confidence that steadied her nerves. As the night grew deeper, Ethan found himself watching Clara as she tucked Miguel into bed, her hands gentle and sure. She carried a quiet strength that words could hardly describe, and it drew him in more with every passing hour. He admired her intelligence, yes, but there was more, something deeper that he could feel but not name. Clara caught him staring and laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Ethan smiled back, unsure when his own guarded heart had started to open. A silence settled between them, comfortable and full of unspoken things. The restaurant was warm and filled with soft light, the kind that made every table feel private and safe. Clara sat across from Ethan, her hands resting on the linen as she admired the calm smile on his face. Weeks had passed since that first meeting on the plane, and now she was leading the language team with pride. Miguel was happy in his new routine, and life finally felt like it was shifting in a good direction. Ethan raised his glass, congratulating her on the incredible progress she had made. They shared stories about the students and the teachers, laughing over small mistakes and unexpected victories. Clara spoke about a shy girl who started speaking Italian with confidence, and Ethan listened as if every word mattered. The food arrived, rich with flavor, and they both relaxed into the easy rhythm of the evening. Outside, the city hummed with life, but in that little corner of the world, it felt like time had slowed down. Clara found herself watching him more than she realized, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. After a quiet pause, Ethan set his fork down and leaned back, his eyes thoughtful and distant. He began to speak about his past, his voice softer than before, almost hesitant. He told her about the accident that took his wife, about the emptiness that followed him for years afterward. Clara listened, her breath catching as she felt the weight of his pain in every word. It was a side of him she had never seen, raw and deeply human. She reached across the table without thinking, resting her hand over his for just a moment. Ethan didn't move, but his eyes met hers with a quiet gratitude that said more than words could. He admitted that for a long time he had shut out the idea of love, too afraid to feel it again. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, not wanting him to see. The candle between them flickered, casting soft shadows on their faces as the night stretched on. Clara pulled her hand back gently, smiling to cover the storm of feelings building inside her chest. She told him she was sorry for what he had been through, her voice steady even as her heart ached. Ethan nodded, as if her understanding gave him a piece of peace he hadn't known he needed. She wanted to say more, to tell him what was stirring inside her, but she held back. Instead, she picked up her glass again, her eyes lowering as if the words she carried were too delicate to share just yet. The plane hummed softly as it climbed through thick clouds, and Clara gripped the armrest tighter than she meant to. She tried to smile at Miguel, who was seated across the aisle with a tablet in his lap, completely calm. Ethan noticed the way Clara's shoulders tensed and how her breath caught with every little shake of the cabin. He leaned closer, speaking in a low tone, telling her turbulence was normal and would pass soon. Clara nodded, but her fingers trembled as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A sudden jolt made her heart race, and she shut her eyes, gripping the armrest again with both hands. Ethan watched her for a second, then reached out, gently taking one of her hands in his. His palm was warm and steady, and she felt her own heartbeat slow just by that simple touch. She opened her eyes and found his gaze on her, calm and protective, like an anchor in the storm. The noise of the engines faded as her focus narrowed to that connection. They didn't speak for a while, letting the quiet moment stretch between them, heavier than they expected. Clara felt a strange mix of safety and confusion as she realized how natural his touch felt. Ethan gave her hand a light squeeze, almost as if he was silently saying she wasn't alone up there. She breathed out slowly, her fear softening as she kept her eyes on him. The cabin lights dimmed, and for a moment, it felt like there was no one else in the world. When another small shake rattled the plane, Clara instinctively tightened her grip on his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted slightly closer, his shoulder brushing hers. Their eyes met again, holding longer this time, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It felt deeper, something neither of them had planned for. Her lips parted, but she didn't know what to say, so she simply let the moment breathe. Ethan cleared his throat softly, but he didn't let go of her hand, and she didn't move hers either. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then back at him, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. He offered a small smile, one that felt private and only meant for her. The plane continued through the night sky, carrying them both towards something they couldn't quite name yet. Clara leaned back against her seat, her mind spinning, unable to ignore the new feeling taking root in her heart. The grand hall was alive with applause as Ethan stepped to the microphone, his voice steady but carrying a spark of pride. Guests from different countries filled the room, celebrating the success of the Institute's first year. Clara stood near the side of the stage, unaware that his speech was about to turn personal. Miguel sat in the front row, clapping excitedly, his smile wide and proud. The lights above were warm and golden, making everything feel almost magical. Ethan spoke about the challenges of starting something new and the people who made it possible. Then he turned toward Clara, calling her name, and motioned for her to join him on stage. Her eyes widened, but she stepped forward, feeling every pair of eyes follow her. Ethan described her as the heart of the program, someone whose talent had touched countless lives. Clara felt her cheeks flush as the crowd rose in cheers, clapping louder with every word he spoke. When the event ended and the crowd began to drift out, Ethan guided Clara to a quieter corner of the hall. The music softened in the background, and the chatter faded until it felt like there was only the two of them. Clara looked up at him, still breathless from the attention, unsure why her heart was racing so fast. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers with a depth she had never seen before. Something in his expression told her this moment was different from all the others. "You changed my life," he said, his voice low, almost trembling. "On the day you translated words in the air, and without even knowing, you translated my heart back to love." Clara froze, the weight of his confession settling over her like a wave. For a moment, she didn't speak, too stunned by the raw honesty shining through his words. Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek as if asking a silent question. Her chest ached with emotions she had been holding back for months. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief and something beautifully new. She whispered his name, barely loud enough to hear over the soft hum of the hall. He didn't wait any longer. He leaned in, closing the space between them, and kissed her gently. The world seemed to stop, all the noise and movement fading into a quiet moment that belonged only to them. Clara kissed him back, her heart racing as if it had finally found a home it had been searching for all along. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Ethan's home, lighting up the living room where Clara and Miguel were playing with a puzzle. Ethan walked in quietly, holding a small velvet box in his hand, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. Clara looked up and smiled, unaware of the life-changing moment about to unfold. Miguel giggled as he fit the last piece into place, proud of his little achievement. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped closer, his voice softer than usual. "Clara," he said, dropping to one knee, and suddenly the room grew still except for Miguel's curious gasp. Clara's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to understand what was happening. Ethan opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring that sparkled in the sunlight. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion, every word carrying the weight of his love. Miguel jumped to his feet, eyes wide with excitement, looking from Ethan to Clara. Clara's tears came before her words, streaming down her cheeks as she nodded over and over, unable to hold back her joy. Miguel clapped his little hands and shouted, "Does that mean I get a new dad?" His laughter filled the room, pure and bright, as he ran into Ethan's arms. Ethan lifted Miguel up, hugging him tight, feeling like his world had finally found its missing pieces. Clara wrapped her arms around both of them, her heart overflowing with gratitude and happiness. Weeks later, under a clear blue sky, they gathered in a small garden filled with flowers for a quiet wedding ceremony. Friends from the institute and a few close neighbors formed a circle around them, smiling as they exchanged vows. Clara wore a simple white dress, her hair loose and glowing in the sunlight. Ethan couldn't stop looking at her, amazed that this brilliant, kind woman had said yes to sharing his life. Miguel stood proudly between them, holding both their hands as if guarding their promise. As the ceremony ended, they walked hand in hand, feeling the weight of their pasts lift and drift away. Their home soon filled with laughter, late-night talks, and bedtime stories in 7 different languages. Ethan loved hearing Clara sing softly in French while Miguel answered her in Spanish, the room alive with joy. Evenings were spent dreaming together, building plans for the future that felt limitless. In that new home, love became their first language, spoken without hesitation every single day.